Okay, so now we want to apply our rational choice model to actual terrorist behavior. I'm going to make some simplifying assumptions, but I also want to make an additional point. So the first point I want to make is that um, economists have nothing to say about how references come about. We take these as given. This is something that's kind of given to us. And any economist who says that they understand how preferences come about, you really want to kind of ask them, well, how the heck do they know? Are they psychologists? Are they anthropologists? Because, by the way, those fields actually do tell us something about preferences, how preferences come about, not to mention biology and evolutionary biology and so on and so forth, right? So, with that said, we also don't know, or rather, we take as given the amount of resources, right? And so, also, oops, also resources are given. Now we can say something about how resources kind of might evolve, technological innovation, and so on and so forth. And to be honest, I mean there are kind of ways of thinking about how preferences might change as well through using economic and game theoretic tools, as we've done in evolutionary biology, or in our evolutionary game theory models. But remember, the source of all of that is through biology and culture and all of that, right? So it's really us economists trying to understand those processes, than saying, well, here's a toolkit that helps us define those processes. It's really going outside our field to understand our field better, to shine a light on our field. That's kind of what's going on. So resources are given, and then once that's done, that's now we can unleash the rational choice process. Okay? So we're going to start with a specific assumption, which is to say that people want to be terrorists. Why? I don't know. But they do want to be terrorists. And maybe the why question is important, but that's why question is, I mean, not maybe, it is important, but that's a question that, is better answered by psychologists and, other folks, right? So people want to be terrorists. What does that mean for our model? What that implies is that people don't value terrorism, right? Now, I'm going to make an extreme kind of valuation. What's the most extreme value? If you value something really a lot, you just don't want to give it up, right? So extreme value might imply you don't want to give it up. What would an indifference curve look like if you didn't want to give up terrorism at all? That all you cared about is terrorism? Well, it would be vertical lines, wouldn't it? And so for terrorists, their preference ordering kind of looks like that. Now, of course, notice that they want to move to the highest indifference curve, or the highest possible level of utility. That's moving to the right. But they're going to do that till they run out of resources. Where are they going to run out of resources? This time around, the slope doesn't matter, because the slope is never going to match. It's, just the way the picture is, right? They're going to run out of resources in this corner. That's the corner solution, right? So if people have, let's call them terrorist value preferences, or we can call it a supreme value. That's kind of one of the terms that's been used. If people have terrorist value preferences that kind of overshadows every other desire, well, in that in this kind of a scenario, we get what are called corner solutions, where the amount of Qn is 0, right? Now let's say that somebody says, well, obviously we want to reduce terrorism, and this person is a nice person. He says, these poor terrorists, they're kind of doing all these things because they don't have any other choices. What we need to do is give them more choices, right? So let's look at a policy response here. Give terrorists more choices. What does that mean? So that implies basically that the price of the normal good has gone. I wish I did use the word normal, because that has a meaning in economics, and that's not the way I'm using it. But just regular goods, okay? The price of all these other goods, like beer and TVs and all of that kind of stuff, basically living in a society has gone down, right? So that should give more access to choices. Well, what does that mean, though? Now, I want you to remember something, that the slope of the budget constraint is minus Pn, not Pn, but minus Pt over Pn. Price of terrorism divided by the price of, the regular goods. So then, if Pn goes down, basically that implies that minus Pt over Pn goes up, which basically means that the budget, the red line, let's make it red, that the budget constraint becomes steeper. By the way, not only it becomes steeper, but if you spent all your income on, or all your resources on the regular goods, you'd be able to buy more of these regular goods, right? So how do we reconcile? Let's make a note of that. Also, note that if this person spent all their resources on Qn, then they should be able to get more Qn. Now, of course, we don't know if they're going to spend all the resources or not, but if they did, here's what it would look like, right? So, steeper. Notice the budget constraint would pivot out, so it's become steeper, obviously. And if they spent all their income, that is, they bought no terrorism at all, the amount of Qn would go up as well, right? Notice something. Does the amount of terrorism change? It's still that place there. So clearly, this kind of a policy is not going to work with terrorists. What kind of a policy would work with terrorists? Well, let's look at our original budget constraint. What if we had improved policing? Now that meant, so let's put these back. Let's make a note of this. So notice in this case, let's call this the benevolent policy. The amount of terrorism does not change. But what if we improve policing? Now say you improve policing. What does that mean? that basically means that the price of being a terrorist just went up, didn't it? So the slope, let's go back to red again, of the budget constraint now, it also becomes steeper. Minus PT over PN goes up, but this time around it implies that person can buy less or will buy terrorism if they spent all their resources. Now, what does that mean over here? Well, let's do this. So now remember that the amount of other goods they buy, that those prices haven't changed. So what we have is the following. The price change has pivoted the indifference curve in. And basically what that means is now they're choosing less terror. It hasn't gone down to zero, but they're choosing less terror. So which policy works better, policing or benevolence? Well, now you know the answer. So in this case, the amount of terrorism goes down. So really, here's the bottom line. Policing is more effective than offering more choice. Now, one corollary of this is wealth or access to wealth does not prevent terrorism. Osama bin Laden, billionaire, didn't prevent him becoming a terrorist, did it? Or the 9/11 bombers, Saudis, they were pretty wealthy. They were on their way to become engineers and all of that, right? Didn't prevent them from being terrorists. And so there's this paper by Kruger and Malachkova, which basically says that, poor people actually are not the source of terrorism. So access to wealth does not prevent terrorism, but good policing does. Now, this also is somewhat problematic. There's nuance here, and we'll talk about these nuances for the next class, where we're going to apply some of this to understand, our kind of what the reality is, what we know from the evidence part of all of this. So hopefully this makes sense. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do, so here's a question. I'll ask that on the discussion kind of thing. Okie dokie. Well, hopefully this makes sense, and let me know if you have any questions.